Hi, everyone. I'm James Garbutt.
And I'm Denny Dumas.
And this is the Garbutt Dumas Real Estate Podcast.
Welcome back to the Garbutt Dumas Real Estate Podcast with your hosts, James Garbutt and Denny Dumas. Today's going to be an educational one, guys. James has spent months researching.
A couple days.
James is going to take us through the new provincial standard for energy efficiency for construction of new homes moving forward. And there are some important dates to keep in mind as you are thinking about building a new home for your family. James is going to kind of take us through it, and we're going to throw a ton of questions at him. He has done a wild amount of research and is probably the most knowledgeable person in the province right now.
No, I'm
stuff.
not. Definitely not. Yeah, let me warn you here. I'm not an expert at this stuff, but I have read it. I have read the pamphlets. I have built a few homes. I am genuinely interested in this topic, but it does get a little complicated, and you do need some specialists to really understand this. So I guess I'm going to just put this out there. If there is someone that is an expert in this field, I would love to do an episode with you and really get nerdy on this topic to go to the highest level. But for now, I'm going to give you my surface level thoughts on what we're doing and just some things to think about over the next few years, because what the province is trying to do, and from the pamphlets I have, 41 local governments or 41 different cities around BC are adopting this or committing to it. And it's basically implementing a step code designation, which is an energy efficiency designation for residential and building construction. So, there's step 1 to 5, and step code 5 is the highest level, which they also give a designation for net zero, which basically means that you have at step code 5, you have a very energy efficient house that could be eventually off the grid or self-sustaining. So where do I begin with this, Denny? there's the, I can go nerdy on the construction. I can talk about let me just roll right into it, because the early days are is by 2032, they want to get to step code 5. So different cities are making different commitments to get there. And, for New Westminster, where we operate, where I live, they're hoping to get to a step code 4 by 2022, which is pretty high up. So over this 2020 and 2021, the whole goal with, I'm sure, most communities is to get people used to this process, used to getting all the extra reports and testing done throughout construction. So I think the step code 1 and 2 are pretty achievable. There's not a huge cost. It's just more get the habit in, get builders familiar with the systems and the testing and how to apply certain, wall assemblies. And then once we get to step code 3, it starts to level up, and step code 4 levels up, and step code 5 is just kind of fine tuning. So, the overall, the highest level is just higher insulation and smarter design. And I when you see the types of homes we're putting up today, you're getting designs all over the place. People are just putting up homes that look pretty because they like the look. Which excites me about this is because design is going to move into a more purposeful, meaningful thing. And when you look at a home in the future, you're just going to be able to tell that it was a smart designed home for energy efficiency. So it's going to completely change our expectation on curb appeal and what a smart home looks like down the road.
Is that going to limit the design to be more energy efficient?
It will. Yeah, it will. But, and it doesn't mean that it's going to be ugly.
Yeah.
It just means that, there's going to be certain homes that would be more effective than others. Like, as an example, we like having, in, say, West Vancouver, for example. You have a lot of those homes that have floor-to-ceiling windows with views looking over the city and Inner Harbor. The only difference in the future is that, well, one, you're going to have to limit certain, your windows to a certain level. So, it may restrict you from doing a full wall window. And 2, you just want to make sure you have enough overhang to block the summer sun.
Right.
So it's about the summer sun angle is a big part of it. You don't want direct light from summer sun. Winter sun's good. So it just means that you might have to have more overhang or reduce the window space in some way. But I can go full on this because there's a lot to cover here.
I'll let you start, and then I'll ask questions along the way.
So let's just start about like early days and what the next 2020 is going to likely look like.
Even just like changes from what builders are putting up today versus what 2020 is going to look like versus what 2022 is going to look like when we get to step 4.
Good, yeah, good point. Okay, so let's talk about that. So just the one, we got plans done. Denny and I got plans done for a home that we're going to likely build in Queens Park, and we have the difference being this is the first time. Yeah, they have an energy advisor that takes your plans and does an energy assessment of it, and then we're going to have to do air tightness testing at a certain level of construction. So. They basically did a full evaluation of our plans. They made some suggestions. I had a sit down with the people there, and they talk about, do you want to commit to step code 1, step code 2, or step code 3? And right now, there's no obligation to go higher unless you choose to. But there is, regardless of what you choose, you have to do certain testing along the way. So the way that most homes are built today, the exterior, let's talk about insulation because this is really what it comes down to. So the exterior walls will be 2x6 construction. So you have 2x6 walls on the outside that have batten insulation for the most part, rain screen, vapor barrier on the inside, rain screen sheet, paper on the outside, and then some sort of stripping and siding. So really it goes siding, little strips that create an air gap, rain screen paper wrap, and then 2x6 construction. And that's far better than what we were building 20 years ago, or 20, 30, 40 years ago. But it's far from, it could be improved significantly. So, to get to like a step code 3, for example, or, let's go step code 4, because, some neighbors across the street did it and I watched the whole thing come up. So that exterior wall on a step code 4, you would add basically there's a lot of ways to get there. So there's no one way to get there. You could do, you could do a very deep frame. You can do a double frame where it's 2x4 walls, but I'm going to go with what I think makes most sense. And that's what my neighbors did across the street. They just added 2-inch rigid board on the outside. So 2-inch rigid board is just like I think they're like 4x8 sheets. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's just a rigid board of insulation and they have a higher R value per inch. And so when you're doing that same sort of 2x6 construction, you're putting a 2-inch rigid board on the outside and you're fully sealing it up so that you're taping all the seams so that there's no air gaps. And that's a big part of this is air testing. Right now, there really is no air testing with our code. So you can put batten insulation up and you can put in these uninsulated window frames and you can have a lot of holes where the insulation doesn't meet. Some proactive people spray foam all the gaps. Some people don't. So if you're not on top of your trades or how much they care, you don't know what you're going to get. But all those, if you're not on it, there could be a ton of gaps in your insulation. So what they're forcing now is air testing. So there's a genuine test that has to happen that if you fail, you have to fix it. And aside from having that extra 2 inches of rigid board on the outside of your exterior framing, you're going to have to make sure all those little gaps are spray foam and insulation on the inside. So I'm just talking about the exterior walls. To get to a step code 4, which, New West is trying to do by 2022, and different cities will have their timeline, you're going to also have to add insulation to the rigid board to the foundation walls. So, that might be like a 1.5 or 2-inch rigid board insulation. And to me, it seems to make most sense to put it on the exterior of the wall, exterior of the foundation, permitting no one damages it. You also need to add rigid board or insulation underneath the concrete slab at the bottom floor or the basement. They want to move windows from double pane uninsulated frames to triple pane insulated frames. Roof insulation, right now I think you can just spray in 12 inches of sprayed in loose insulation in the roof, but they want to increase it to minimum R40 and potentially R100 in some cases, which is huge. It means that you can have like essentially a meter of insulation in your roof, which means they'll have to relax, roof heights and stuff. But an R40 is a high level of insulation and sealing compared to what we have today. So I think right now we're kind of at an R20, and so they want to double it. So how to get there is going to be a little more creative. So I talk about under slab insulation, concrete foundation walls, exterior exposed walls, roof, windows, and then they test that with air tightness. So they'll do some sort of test once you get to a certain level of construction where I think they seal up your home and they run some sort of machine that measures how much air is seeping through. And on this document they have names for it, but just imagine, I don't know, some sort of like candle or smoke sort of detector where you're walking around with a little smoke wand. And when you have an seepage happening, that smoke will draw you to where that air is seeping out. So that's kind of how they test you for weak spots. So that's just something new that's going to be implemented. But what all this means is if you do this right and you put rigid board basically around the full exterior of your home, and one of the examples, and it makes a lot of sense to me, is putting rigid board on top of the sheathing of your roof as well. So extra insulation on top of your attic, plus rigid board on top of the sheathing of your roof. But if basically all the sheathing and all the framing, all the wood that is the structure of your home is encapsulated by this rigid board, it's going to preserve it better in the long term. So right now, the way that we're building these homes is they can, if you have just rain screen paper wrap protecting the elements from your plywood and framing, that can get easily exposed to condensation, to moisture. Like any little penetration through there can allow water in, and that's going to deteriorate, or some areas will fail. But if you add an extra 2 inches of rigid board and seal that up, and that's extra protection, condensation may never get to your framing. And that means that wood may stay dry for 100, 200 years plus. And so these structures can last much, much longer time if they're done right. And that's kind of what excites me, is that people are going to be building these homes that are going to just be incredibly durable. I currently own a home that was built in 1891 with 1891 construction. That's 130 years from that. So, when you think of structures they were building then that are lasting 130 years, these homes, in theory, could be 200 plus. So yeah, there's going to be a lot coming, Denny. I don't. That's a lot.
Do you think there's any rigid board in your 1892 house?
No.
I didn't know what rigid board was, so I Googled it.
There's probably no exterior insulation too. So, so I guess how you get to step code 1, step code 2, 3, or 4, 5. There's a lot of pages to read, but the simplest thing for me is you're adding 2 inches of rigid board on the exterior walls. You're ideally adding rigid board on your roof. You're adding that rigid board around the perimeter of your foundation. You're adding it under your concrete slab in the basement. And you're going to a triple pane insulated window frame. So all that's going to cost more money. All this process of getting, energy modeling done, energy advisor, getting a mechanical designer. These are all going to add more costs to the planning stages. So, I don't know how much this is going to amount to, but if I were just taking a rough stab at it, and you're building, let's call it a 3,000 square foot home, getting the extra energy modeling done, the energy advisor, doing all the extra insulation. If a 3,000 square foot home at, call it $250 a foot build cost was $750,000 in today's value, I would like to think that all these extras are going to increase the cost by about $50,000 and probably add 2-3 months to your construction timeline. So, when I look at an aggressive plan to go from nothing to step code 4 by 2022 in New Westminster, and probably some other cities are going to do this, that's pretty aggressive. And I don't know if our zoning really reflects structures that can last this long. And so, when I look at, this is the higher level discussion on this. I love where the intent is on trying to make homes energy efficient and potentially get ready to be off the grid one day. But a lot of the research that I've done seems to have cities planning for 2041, which is, they may have started these plans 10 years ago, but right now that's almost 20 years away.
Yeah.
And if you're planning on 2041 and these homes last 200 years, are we really building structures the right way? Are we really, for me, the question is, are we putting structures up that are designed to last a very long time, very thoughtfully designed, energy efficient design, but going to be obsolete in 50 years when they increase density?
Right.
So that's a whole nother topic to go into, Denny. But I've in I guess kind of getting there. I think when you look at how cities are going to grow, and looking at the reality of the numbers, and looking at what some forward-thinking areas, like, I don't know if you know of Portland, they've basically banned single family zone dwellings in cities. I think it's over 25,000 people. So that's kind of a forward thought. And they have this, we have everyone, here when you propose something like a triplex or increasing density in a neighborhood that's single family, you have this not in my backyard movement. In Portland, they have a movement that's basically the opposite of that. It's in my backyard. Yes, in my backyard movement. So that's kind of how the whole push happened. So, when I'm looking at the fact that we have RS1 zoning in New West and a lot of cities where you have a 6,000 square foot lot and you can build a 3,000 square foot home on it, and there's no incentive. In fact, it's kind of almost a penalty when you're going in the ground for that basement. And Vancouver, every city has their different zoning, but I just think that we're completely we're building structures that are completely, they're going to be obsolete when we get to 50 years from now, 100 years from now, populations. So right now, in certain zones, New Westminster and other cities, I'm sure, a 6,000 square foot lot allows you to do a 3,000 square foot home. So there's no real incentive. That's kind of a borderline where there's no real incentive to go in the, underground, have a full basement, because you can have a nice 2-level home there. But why not? Why not go fully in the basement? What does that matter? Yes, it's going to be an extra car parked and an extra tenant there. But if these homes are going to be built to last 200 years, I think we should be mindful that I would like to see a 6,000 square foot lot be set up to have 3 families living on it. I would like to see 3,000 square feet above grade, a full basement that might be, who knows, call it 1,500 square feet, and an infill in the back. And personally, when we're talking about trying to improve affordability and get more people owning homes, I would encourage stratification as opposed to one landlord, living in neighborhoods where there's one homeowner that has a suite rented and an infill laneway house rented in the back. I'd like to see that spread out, that wealth spread out, and have the suite to basically be a up-down duplex, or maybe it's a front-back duplex, and the infill being a third homeowner. So 3 people owning. And in Portland, basically, they're kind of encouraging duplexes, triplexes, and they call these things, I think they're called cottage homes, which is basically, imagine like a cluster cottage clusters, which is, imagine a bunch of little cottages that have a communal backyard. So it's really kind of forward thinking on how people live. And I love that. And I think if we're going to adopt an aggressive energy code plan, it should go simultaneously with density that makes sense for how long these structures are going to last. So in my opinion, if these things are going to last 200 years, well, I'd like them to be at least, not thought for 2041 density plans. I'd like it to be for call it 2100, 2120, call it 100 years out, call it 75 years out. But I'd like to see more duplexes, triplexes, infills that are actually stratified instead of having one owner own them. And I think that really justifies the additional costs and how long it'll take and how expensive it'll take to build these homes.
What are cities saying right now when those types of topics are brought up?
Well, it's this not in my backyard mentality. So when a city's trying to bring, I don't know, but from what I've observed is when a city brings these initiatives to it, you get some people that want neighborhoods stuck in time, frozen in time. They don't want to see more construction in their neighborhood. So they don't want to be living in a construction site. 2, they don't want to have all these cars on the street. And 3, there's this sort of animosity towards builders and developers thinking that there's going to be excessive profits and therefore more incentive to do more of these. But when I look at the reality of going through this process, in some areas where it's easy to put up a single family home, you could get permit approval in 2-3 months and have a house up within a year. But when I look at the process of going through this with, in Queen's Park with the city of New Westminster, not only are you needing to restore a home that's old, but so you have to go through heritage design guidelines, you have to go through heritage committee, you have to get all this approval on having a home like this, because let me clarify, this is a Queen's Park specific issue where they want to, restore, preserve the neighborhood. But when you look at all the steps it takes to replicate or restore an existing heritage home, which usually involves moving it on the lot, and then doing an infill structure that would be a step code 2, 3, or 4, depending on when you do it, to me, that's going to be at least 18 months to get that approved. And then you have a very complicated design to build. So to me, that's a 3-year process. So, if a builder is looking at a 15% margin on a build and they go out in Surrey or Langley and they buy a lot and they can turn around for 15% in a year, if all goes well. And when you buy this, dwelling with potential in New West, and it takes you 18 months to get it approved, or in Vancouver, I'm sure there's similarities there as well. And then you have a very complicated build that is going to be over 12 months because you're either, in New West, the example I'm saying is you're moving an existing structure and replicating it. But if you were starting from scratch, maybe it would be a 12-month build. But my guess is I think it would be a little bit more. But let's call it 18 months. So when you're talking about a 3-year turnaround, there's not going to be many builders or developers that are going to be excited about these projects, especially when there's uncertainty at the early days on what to do. So I don't think a neighborhood will blow up in construction. 2, there's already delays with getting these permits at the city. So it's not like it's going to be, rushed. I think that the level of construction is going to be the same. Yes, in the next 10, 20 years, there will be more cars on the street. But 20 plus years out, that'll change. The cars will start to diminish as Uber and self-driving stuff happens. So I think in the next 10, 20 years, it's inconvenient. But I don't think it's as inconvenient as people think it is. It's a long, complicated process. It's not going to blow up overnight. And I think there's probably smart ways to implement this. We recognize that the oldest homes are the most likely to get torn down. So why not kind of have these incentives where you let these people that you're adopting this aggressive step code, energy requirement, why not you let them increase the FSR, let them build bigger structures, let them go from a 0.5, sorry, an FSR is floor space ratio. So if it's a 0.5 FSR, you can build 3,000 square feet on 6,000 square foot lot. For me, when you look at infill and not penalizing people for going in ground, because I get the concern of having massive homes, monster homes. Let's have designs that restrict the floor, the footprint or the massing of the home, but let's not penalize people for going in the ground. And for me, that should be like, instead of a 0.5 FSR, it should be 0.8. Maybe 0.1 on some Vancouver 33 by 120 lots. Maybe
one.
Yeah, like one. Yeah. Like if there, Vancouver's a little bit of a different apple. So if you have a 4,200 square foot lot in Vancouver, that should probably be a 1. Like you build 100% of that lot size and structure. In the suburbs, maybe the 0.5 or 0.6 FSR should be 0.8. And then the further you go out, where do you want single family dwellings 100 years from now? Probably Anmore, probably Belcarra, probably South Langley or something like that, but probably not in New Westminster. And New Westminster's an inner city suburb. I don't feel any need that should have single family dwellings 100 years from now. Hey, my 2 cents.
So most of what you mentioned in terms of increasing efficiency in new construction is exterior and insulation. Do they talk about exterior materials as well, or it's mostly just inside the walls?
They don't talk about exterior materials in this, but I will say I'm looking at this because of a Queen's Park build, which does have guidelines for materials, but that's irrelevant for the city of like Lower Mainland or Greater Vancouver. So I feel there will be more movement towards that, but I think in general, the materials people are using on outside of a homes are more conscious of their hardy board, hardy plank siding. That's kind of a recycled material. Now, how good or bad that is, that's up to you. I don't know, but to me, a hardy board or hardy plank that should last a very long time. I'd love to have a rule where it's hardy board may be the exception, and there might be some corrugated steel or some board and batten hardy product exceptions, but I'd love to see fake stone go away. I'd love to see it be all natural stone, natural wood, but that's just me, so that doesn't mean that it's going to be a better product. So I think they do have requirements for keeping, one thing I haven't gone into is design, the exterior design. So when it comes to having a step code 4 or a high performance building, it I think it's anyone that's going to go that far is going to want to have an envelope of their house, be durable. Okay, so they're going to have that, whether it's real wood or natural material or hardy material. That is kind of irrelevant. But what they're doing on the outside is it's window placement and overhangs that are important. Okay, so you want to keep water away from the walls. How do you do that? Overhangs. Okay, so when you see these stucco homes or stucco buildings without overhangs, it's just doomed to fail. So one, I think overhangs is key. Two, window placements. I mentioned a lot of the design comes from maximizing, or not maximizing, but like taking advantage of winter sunlight, but shading the inside from summer sunlight. Mm-hmm. So that just means that, if the summer sun angle comes in at a steeper angle from higher above, so you can have overhangs that block that, but when it gets to winter angle, it goes right into your home and warms it. It means less windows on the north side of a home, more windows on a south side of the home, potentially. It also means potentially angling your home. So if you have a house that, maybe your street might, call it, it's facing southwest, for example. They might change the zones or allow you to angle your home up to 30 degrees to kind of face a more favorable angle to capture the sun at a better angle. There's also going to be solar panels that we'll have to think into effect down the road, but they don't talk about them in these systems. In these systems, they simply talk about designing your windows, keeping water away from the homes, having extra insulation on the outside, and the mechanical design on the inside is a big changer. They talk about heat recovery ventilation systems. I'm probably butchering that, but basically, right now, you build a home, you have a bunch of vents sticking out the walls and the roof, and that's a lot of heat loss, and they want to minimize that. And not only, so they want to reduce the vents going out, but they also want to have a heat exchanger for the cold air coming in. So imagine your hottest air that rises inside your home being the air that goes out of the home, but before it goes out of the home, it goes through a heat exchanger with the cold air coming in, and that warms the cold air coming in. So they can make those systems more efficient, and basically the goal there is to reduce the heat loss going out and warm up the air coming in. So that doesn't really answer your material question, but it basically, I guess what I'm getting at is less vents, smarter, simpler shapes. You don't have a U-shaped home. It's going to be more of a box or rectangle shaped footprints, because the more intricate shaped your home is, the more ways that heat can go out. So the shape of your home, when you're talking about all the costs of everything, I think people are going to put nice materials in the outside. I'd hate for cheap fiberglass, fiberglass isn't the worst thing, but I'd hate for, say, vinyl siding on the exterior of a house that's gone through all this. I think the people that are going to spend the money on this are going to recognize that, it's got to have some nice stuff on the outside. And one of the big things of this, right now, if it's $250 a foot, maybe that's raw cost, but to build a house in Vancouver, so you buy a 33 by 122 lot in Vancouver and you're putting an $800,000 structure on it, or you buy a 6,000 square foot lot in the burbs and you're putting a 200 a foot, 3,000 square feet, call it a 600,000 square. On a 33 lot in Vancouver, you're putting $800,000 of structure on it. On a 6,000 square foot lot in the burbs, you're putting $600,000 in structure on it currently. My issue with that is you're putting $800,000 on a lot that's probably costing you $1.5 million. And you're putting $600,000 on a lot that's probably costing you $1 million to $1.2 million. This step code stuff, if you start leveling up everything, you might be putting $1 million instead of $800,000, mm-hmm. or $800,000 instead of $600,000, and it respects the land more, in my opinion, which is just better. Like we're building homes today that a lot of them are just going to look ugly in 20 years from now, and this is going to change that. I'd like to think that we might see the homes that are getting built in 10 years be similar to the homes that are getting built in 50 years from now, with the exception of technology inside the homes. But who knows? Time will tell.
Do you think, obviously costs more to put them up. Do you think and you mentioned the longevity of the homes, just building them better, more efficient, is going to make them last longer and be around longer. do you think that resale value is going to be improved compared to a home built 5 years ago, for example?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think that, like, in the short term. So let's call it 2 years from now, you start building step code 4 homes and they're finished in 2022. I don't know, what is that? 2023. I think those homes that, like, it's going to basically diminish the spec builders at that moment in time. I think in the short term, when those homes get built, the buyers aren't going to understand what they're buying compared to like a 5-year-old home that doesn't have all that stuff in it.
Yeah.
So I think, like 5 to 10 years from now, when buyers are looking at the option of buying this step code 4 home that was built to the highest standard versus a step code 1 or nothing home that was built 5 years prior, I think in a lot of, let's call it suburb markets, I don't think they're going to pay the premium. So I think there's going to be a period where people aren't going to understand it, or at least respect the premium. They respect the extra year of construction in the process and everything that goes into it.
Yeah.
So I think there's going to be a time frame there where spec building goes away or gets minimized, and people are putting more into their home than they can sell them for. So I think there will be a gap, but then that will be a limited amount of time. Maybe it's 5 years, maybe it's less or more. And all it takes is one more hot market for people to, for prices to really jump. But I think it's going to be just an adjustment period. And then there'll be call it 10, 20 years out after that where people are more savvy and people will pay for that premium.
Do you think cities will start adopting some sort of incentive program to push people to start building this earlier than 2041?
Yeah, they already do.
Okay.
But I don't think the incentives are nearly good enough.
Okay.
So they are already, and I've written them down somewhere, but it's like, if you voluntarily go to like a step code 4 or 5, they might add an extra 0.05 FSR. So, you're getting, to translate that would be on a 3,000 square foot home. If you go to the highest level, that means that you might get an extra 300 square feet. Mm-hmm. But keep in mind, to go to the highest level, you have extra thick walls that are eating up, call it 100 of that, or maybe 100, half of that. So, or maybe even more, to be honest with you, but let's call it half for simple. So really you're gaining an extra 150 square feet.
Yeah.
So that's not enough of an incentive. To me, I think the whole thing needs to get revamped, that these homes are going to last for 200 plus years. Let's talk about what density era are we planning for? Are we planning for 20 years from now? Are we planning for 50 years from now? Are we planning for 100 years from now? Because if these things are lasting, I'd like to avoid a generation of teardowns that are unnecessary. If we're going to make them be energy efficient, let's at least have it mindful of future density so they're not getting torn down when they do change density and eventually. So I'd like this to coincide with the thought of, okay, that 3,000 square foot home can now be, call it 4,000 square feet, and can have an infill house on top of that, and they can be stratified for 3 different owners. How we get there? Well, that's a whole nother podcast.
Well, okay, that was going to be my last question was, they're setting these guidelines out and saying that, okay, by 2041, you have to build step code 5. But how much is
2032? But that's okay.
2032. Yep. Okay, so 12, 13 years. Even in that 13 years, how much different are cities going to be thinking about density? When you look at the last 15 years in Greater Vancouver, how ridiculous density has gotten.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a moment, because that's a good one. So they're thinking about it. They're not thinking from my surface level thoughts, and I would love to be corrected. If you're listening and you disagree, 100% reach out and let's have a chat. But I don't think they're thinking far enough ahead.
Yeah.
So there was this big 2041 initiative. Maybe they were mindful of 2060, 2080 in that, but the zoning doesn't reflect that. And when you look at actual population growth, okay, so let's look at, Vancouver right now, 675,000 people in Vancouver proper.
Yeah.
New Westminster, 75,000 people in New Westminster proper. Lower Mainland, 2.9 million people. 2041, Lower Mainland goes from 2.9 to 4 million. New Westminster goes from 75 to 190. New Westminster goes from 75 to 100,000. Vancouver goes from 675 to 765. So 20 years from now, there's a jump in population. But when you look 100 years from now, Vancouver goes from 2.9 million to 7 million. New West goes from 75,000 to 190, 200,000. Vancouver goes from 675,000 to 1.7-ish million, based on like I call it a 0.08 or 0.09% growth rate. To translate that, New West, 75,000 people to 190,000 people. That's if 500 to 600 people live in a tower, that's like 200 more towers. So, do you want to live in a city where there's in an area of New Westminster that's like the airport, the size of the airport, that's going to have 200 more towers? I'd like to see a city that's kind of blended with maybe 100 more towers. Maybe the busy streets away from infrastructure get mid-rises, and the single-family homes on the quiet streets like Queen's Park and the West End and the Heights get triplexes or duplexes with infills. So I'd like to see it more blended and spread out as opposed to towers meet the uber wealthy homeowners, because that would be a major wealth divide in New Westminster if that didn't happen. Burnaby, as you know, has probably 100 towers in the planning coming down the pipe. And if New West 100 years from now translates to 200 towers, what does Vancouver translate to?
Totally.
I mean, that would be thousands of towers, right? So, or bigger towers.
I think what you're mentioning is inevitable in how they blend neighborhoods together. But how practical do you think it is in the short term?
It involves how practical is? It's very impractical, but possible.
Yeah.
So, and why I say it's impractical, but possible, if all the cities work together and like New Westminster thought, hey, you know what? We want to be a forward-thinking city. We're going to change our zoning to reflect 100 years from now instead of 20 years from now like everyone else. If they were the only ones that did it and everyone else didn't do it, there might be a flood of construction coming to New West that doesn't match up with the rest of the city. Now, They could probably alleviate that with higher permit costs that reduce that, adjust that profit margin, in a way, or a longer building permit application. But it really takes all the cities to kind of be on board with it. And I would like to think that, yes, you're giving away a lot of zoning at once, but if everyone does it in a smart way, and and maybe it's higher permit costs if there is no smart way to do it, but that higher permit cost might deter the spec builds to a certain level that's sustainable. Though that permit cost should go into infrastructure.
Do you know if cities are having those conversations together? Because it seems, from a real estate perspective, it seems like every city has different guidelines, different zonings, different tree bylaws. It's just kind of all over the place in Greater Vancouver.
I think we're a victim of being compartmentalized.
Yeah.
I think there might be talking, but it's not like, I'm sure it's going dreadfully slow. And when I hear of the chats of, the Patella Bridge, Surrey wants a wider bridge to get more traffic through. New West doesn't want the traffic because where's it going to go? That leads me to believe that there's a lot of cities not working well together when it was like, let's get a wider bridge and let's tunnel it right to Highway 1 so it doesn't, upset anyone. How much that's going to cost a fortune? Let's make it up in building permits that reflect 100 year from now density. So yeah, that would be like a dream, to put McBride underground. But it's going to be stupid expensive. But maybe there's a way to get there through building permits that reflect, a much higher density. At least have the chat. At least dream about what the perfect world would look like down that road. Not just kind of put Band-Aids over short-term problems. Anyway,
are you going to run for mayor?
No. No. But I guess, and I want to, we should probably wrap this up pretty quick. I do want to mention, I am far from an expert on this. This is just a lot of surface level thoughts on something new that's happening. But if you know of anyone, or if you're listening to this and have, are an expert in one of these areas or have something to share, reach out. Maybe this becomes a topic we dig deeper into, so you can fix all my mistakes, and we can actually have a good chat about it. I think that would be something of value.
If I'm honest, I thought today's episode was going to be extremely dry and boring, but it was really interesting, actually.
All right. Well, thank you, Denny. I don't know if I can say thank you for that, but yeah, I think it is interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's exciting. I think there's the transition to getting into this stuff is going to be rocky. I'd love to see zoning reflect it. It's going to be a shame if it doesn't. It's going to be a shame if 3,000 square foot homes that are incredibly energy efficient are built on 6,000 square foot lots without future density in mind. But it is what it is. I think there's going to be, I can't control that.
Yeah.
And I'm not running for mayor.
Thanks for putting all the time and effort into researching too.
Oh, very welcome, guys. Hope you got a lot out of this. Thanks for listening.